everyone, and hope everybody's keeping cool today, because boy, it's hot out. So having said that, we're going to deal with some hot topics today. And one of the hottest topics is obviously the travel updates and what we're seeing. And over the course of the summer, we really are moving in the right direction. And it started on, I believe it was July 5th. On July 5th, they allowed for fully vaccinated people who were eligible to enter Canada not to have to quarantine. That was the first stage. Next was August 9th. August 9th, there were two things that happened. The first was that for the first time since March of 2020, American citizens and permanent residents living in the US and who are vaccinated were eligible to enter for discretionary purposes. So people who were coming up to see Niagara Falls or go to Banff or go to Vancouver could now come. They would not have to quarantine. Now, regular testing rules still apply across the board. That means a PCR test taken within 72 hours of travel, and that applies across the board to Canadian citizens and permanent residents. And then the next one we're looking forward to is September 7th. So on September 7th, so the day after Labor Day, Canada will open up to the rest of the world for discretionary travel for everyone who is vaccinated. Now, remember, being vaccinated has a definition under our rules and regulations. So it has to be someone who's had whatever number of shots they need, and it's Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and J&J. So those are the only 4 vaccines that the government is recognizing at this point. And it's 14 days from your last shot. Now, what's interesting is the government on its website changed the guidance on what does 14 days mean. Because initially, when they had it up, it was if you had it done on a Sunday, then the second Sunday after that, you were good to go. They've changed it now, and they're not counting the first day. So it's really 15 days after the last dose. Now, the other thing that's interesting in all of this is when we closed the borders, it was really done on a reciprocal basis, expecting the US to do the same and to open at the same time. And that has not happened. And we now have this, you know, there's been lots of crazy rules that have happened during COVID, including the hotel stays, which are now over. That was August 9th. They got rid of those. But the US has not opened the border except to flights. But you could always fly into the US, and the rules really didn't change. The only thing you needed was not a PCR test, but an antigen test, which I think Shoppers Drug Mart is doing fairly quickly with that. Now, here's another piece of that puzzle. So for Canadian purposes, if you're flying into Canada, you have to have this PCR test. So if you're going to the US for less than 72 hours, do you have to get another test when you're in the US? And the answer is no if you're flying. If you're flying in, you can use that same test to come back if you're within the 72-hour window. So that's important to note. Claire, tell us, how do you come from India? Because the direct flights from India have stopped as of, I think it's now been pushed to the 21st of September at this point. But if I want to come from India after September 7th, and I've got a TRV, it's discretionary travel, and I'm fully vaccinated, can I come? How do I come?
Right, so that travel ban on direct flights from India is still in effect until at least September 21st. We're hoping to get an update well in advance of that date. But as of September 7th, applicants who are entering from India are still going to need to take that indirect flight through a third country in order to arrive in Canada. And there's two main points that they should really keep in mind when they're booking travel. The first is that they need to make sure that they can actually enter that country. So if they require a visa or they require a COVID test to enter that third country, they'll need to make sure that's in place. And the second thing to keep in mind is that they're still not exempt from the pre-entry test that Canada requires at least 72 hours prior to arrival. And they'll need to have that done in a third country. That test can't be done from within India. So make sure you can enter the country and make sure you can get the molecular COVID test that you require to enter Canada in that country as well.
You need like a box of tests, you know, everybody should have a box, and like, you know, every country's got their own rules. So, you know, it's really something. But I like to say like half our job now is travel agents, right? What you need to enter this country and that country and all the rest of it, because it's really remarkable, all the different stuff that's going on. Okay, next thing we want to talk about is temporary residence application process and what we're seeing. And so within the country, it's taking longer, but they're processing. What are we seeing in terms of timelines, Claire?
They're starting to come down from what we were seeing kind of during the height of COVID. I think work permit extensions right now are taking just under 2 months. Study permits are pretty quick. Visitor extensions are taking about 6 months right now. So that's the one that you want to kind of get out ahead of. If you're working on extending your visitor status, do that sooner rather than later, because there is going to be a waiting period if you're doing that from within Canada.
Yeah. Also, overseas, what we're seeing is all over the place, okay? Because it just depends on where you're applying, how busy they are, and what their COVID situations are. Because, you know, in Canada, we're doing pretty well, but in a lot of countries right now, there may not be. Asia in particular has been hard hit recently. Brazil, India was closed down, and things are taking longer overseas, and you've got to expect it. A lot of places had the biometric centers closed, and most are open now, but there are delays because they were closed for so long. And we're hearing stories of that it's taking a long time just to schedule those applications to get the biometrics, and things can't be done without the biometrics. So plan to give yourself extra time, okay? Now, as part of COVID, there was a public policy that allowed for people to change status within the country from visitors to work permits. But that's going to change as far as we've been told. Claire, tell us about that.
Yeah, so that public policy came into effect midway through COVID, and it basically allowed visitors to apply for work permits from within Canada. Usually that wasn't the case. If you were entering Canada, you would need to apply either at the border or through a consulate abroad before coming into work. Now, that public policy is set to expire on August 31st. We don't know whether it will be extended. So best practice for that would be get your application in prior to August 31st. If it's not extended, the regular requirements are going to come back into effect. And like I said, that's applying at the border. Keep in mind that in addition to visa requirements, there's also COVID requirements for border applications. So most individuals are still going to need to make that application through the consulate abroad.
Yeah, so you think about somebody who's here, let's say you got a Brit, and they want to get their work permit at the border. So they want to go to the US. Well, they can't drive to the US, they can only fly to the US. So they need to have a test to fly into the US, then they need the PCR test to come back, and hopefully they're vaccinated, and then they'd be able to come in and get their work permit after September 7th, okay? So that's a big change, and there'll be options there, but there's lots of rules, lots of regulations, and you know what we're seeing throughout all of this is the gatekeeper has become the Air Canada agent at the gate who's saying, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. So you really have to be prepped to know what you can and what you can't do, because there's mistakes being made all the time. When they introduced the no quarantine rules at the beginning of July, I can't tell you, like even immigration upon entry really didn't understand what was going on, because they said, no, this only applies to Canadian citizens and permanent residents. We had lots of kickback about that, but obviously not the test. Restoration. What do we hear about restoration, Claire?
So another public policy that's supposed to be expiring on August 31st of this year, restoration processing times were kind of extended for applicants who had lost status between January 30th of last year and May 31st of this year. They were basically given until August 31st to apply to restore their status. And public policy also gave restoration applicants applying for worker status the option to request interim work authorizations, so they didn't need to wait until their new work permit was issued. They could reach out to immigration, get a letter, and resume work once they had that letter in hand. Both of these are scheduled again to expire August 31st, and if there's no renewal released before that date, we're going to revert to the new rules, which means restoration applications need to be filed within 90 days of the in-Canada applicant losing their status, and no work until you have that work permit in hand from that restoration application.
Yeah, very important, very important. So postgraduate work permit eligibility for graduates. The general rule was that you got 1 year for each year of studies to a maximum of 3. Then during COVID, they came out with a 18-month extension for people who were already here and were already eligible, but that has since expired, correct, Claire?
That's right, that expired end of July of this year.
So it's back to the regular postgraduate work permit eligibility.
That's right. And what immigration has kind of done is released guidance for applicants who are studying remotely from outside of Canada. So those people who are starting new programs and aren't familiar with the rules that apply to their postgrad length should check the immigration website, because there are frequent updates, and you want to make sure that you're aware, you're studying for this amount of time. You want to have predictability in the length of the postgrad that you're actually getting after the fact. So double check those rules, because they are being frequently updated.
All right. And it sort of leads into the next topic, which is permanent residence application processing. As anybody who's been listening to our broadcast is aware, the government during COVID has predominantly, probably 98%, dealt with people within the country and offered permanent residence to people that are already in the country. The last draw was a week ago, and I believe the number was 403. Am I correct, Claire?
You're right.
Okay, 403. And with that, I mean, from pre-COVID, it's still down dramatically. They're pulling less numbers. The numbers have gone down to as low as, I think, 360. They've come up a little bit, but if you graduated from a Canadian school and have a year of skilled work experience, you should be able to qualify for permanent residence under the CEC classification. The other thing that we're noticing is a dramatic lessening of timing on these applications. Claire, maybe you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so mostly for inland CEC applications, we're noticing immigration is definitely meeting their 6-month standard processing time. More frequently than not, we're seeing applications being processed actually under that time. So immigration is doing a really good job at getting those permanent residence applications through and really landing people who are in Canada very quickly. Unfortunately, that's not the case yet for outside of Canada applicants, so we're still seeing those applications taking a little bit more time than usual, so over and above that 6 to 8 month processing standard. We're beginning to see more applications being approved for applicants who are traveling outside of Canada. And as of now, provided that they intend to stay in Canada once they land, they're authorized to travel. There's no longer that March 18th 2020 date that they had to be approved by. A resident who's approved yesterday can travel to Canada with their documents and land, provided that they intend on settling. The one thing that they're kind of restricted from is landing and then going back to their home country to kind of tie up their affairs. Immigration wants to really see an intention to stay here and complete that landing process.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, are we seeing, what about the special pathways? What have we seen on those, Claire?
Those pathways seem to be working really well. It's kind of, again, all across the board. Some of them we've actually seen processed, and that's in just under 3 months. Some of them are still in play. So it really remains to be seen whether immigration is going to process all of those by the end of 2021 or whether it's kind of going to go beyond that timeline.
Mm-hmm. One of the other areas I want to mention, I'm just going to bounce back a little bit to work permit issues, is the medical validity dates. You want to be careful if you haven't traveled on those work permits that your medicals have expired, because what we're seeing is if the medicals have expired, they are deactivating the TRVs in the system, and everybody should be checking before they travel that their TRVs related to their work permits are still valid. We're getting a lot of notifications about medicals being expired, and it's, you know, you could have somebody who's waited a year and a half and those medicals aren't valid anymore and they're planning to come on Saturday. They get to the airport, the TRV isn't good. So you really want to double check that issue. So provincial nominee programs, what are we seeing on them, Claire?
Just a quick update from the PNPs. They are progressing relatively normal now. The big one we saw from Ontario last week is that they launched the expression of interest system for the master's and the PhD graduate streams. So that means that anyone who's eligible could have submitted their profile into Ontario's new pool. And Ontario actually did a draw under those streams last week. They invited 77 applicants. So that's a pretty big number for a program that was just released on August 9th. From that, we're expecting that immigration in Ontario is going to actually continue doing pretty regular draws under that stream. So if you are looking to immigrate through that OINP system, get your profile in the pool, and hopefully you'll get an invitation within, you know, a few weeks after you do submit.
Why would I? Why would I go into that as opposed to CEC?
So the master's graduate stream actually doesn't have a work requirement, whereas the CEC does. So you can kind of get out ahead of that 1 year working waiting period, we call it, if you go through the OINP.
Do I have to graduate?
You do have to graduate.
What happens if you don't graduate?
That's not going to be an option for you then, and you're not going to have great options on the postgrad anyways. So if you are looking to not graduate and maybe change your program of study, continue that, or reach out to us before you stop your full-time study. Good
idea. Good idea. Okay. I think that's everything from my end. Claire, anything over to you?
No, I think that should be good. I just wanted to update on kind of the spousal sponsorship processing that we're seeing there. From an alien perspective, immigration is actually starting to land applicants through that client landing portal. So we weren't seeing that in the past. We're starting to see that now. And we are beginning to see some movement on outside of Canada processing times. And what that means is kind of an indication that immigration is going to be trending back towards that 12-month processing standard that they were hitting pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Well, everybody, I'll repeat what I said at the start. Stay cool. It's hot out there. Hottest day of the summer. Thanks, Stephen. Over to you.
Thank you, Evan. So that is the time, that's all the time we have for today, folks. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And a special thanks to you, Evan and Claire, for sharing your expert knowledge today. If anyone would like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to info@gans.com. You can also reach out to either of the panelists. Their information is provided on screen now. I'd also encourage you all to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.